Before we begin this remarkable journey through history, please take a moment to support our channel. Click that like button if you appreciate historical documentaries, subscribe to stay updated with our latest content, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from today. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. The autumn of 1939 witnessed something unprecedented in the annals of military history. As Royal Air Force bombers roared through the darkened skies above the German port city of Kiel, they carried no explosive ordnance, no incendiary devices, no instruments of traditional destruction. Instead, their bomb bays held millions of pieces of paper, leaflets that would herald the beginning of what military strategists would later recognize as one of the most sophisticated psychological warfare campaigns ever conceived. The concept of using printed materials as weapons of influence predated this moment by decades, but never before had any military force attempted psychological operations on such a massive scale. The British Royal Air Force's leaflet mission over Kiel marked the official commencement of what would ultimately become a 3 billion leaflet campaign across the European theatre. A paper barrage that would prove as effective as conventional ammunition in breaking enemy resistance. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, understood that victory in the Second World War would require more than superior firepower and strategic positioning. The conflict demanded a comprehensive approach that targeted not just enemy positions, but enemy minds. This realization led to the establishment of the Psychological Warfare Division under the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, known as PWD SHAEF, an organization that would revolutionize military thinking about the role of information in armed conflict. The early months of the leaflet campaign revealed both the potential and the challenges of psychological warfare. British intelligence officers, working alongside their American counterparts, developed initial strategies based on careful analysis of German cultural psychology. They recognized that German soldiers and civilians possessed certain characteristics that could be exploited through carefully crafted messaging, a respect for official authority, an appreciation for formal documentation, and an underlying concern for family and homeland that transcended political loyalty. These early operations required unprecedented cooperation between multiple Allied agencies. The Office of War Information, the Political Warfare Executive, and various military intelligence units coordinated their efforts to create a unified approach to psychological warfare. The collaboration extended beyond mere operational coordination. It represented a fundamental shift in how military planners conceived of battlefield effectiveness. Traditional metrics of success, territory captured, enemy forces neutralized, strategic objectives secured, now included psychological indicators such as enemy morale degradation, surrender rates, and civilian cooperation. The technological challenges of delivering printed materials across enemy lines proved formidable. Early leaflet operations relied on modified bomber aircraft that sacrificed payload capacity for paper distribution systems. Pilots and crew members found themselves adapting to missions that required precision timing and careful attention to weather patterns, as wind conditions could scatter leaflets far from their intended targets. The development of specialized delivery systems became a priority, leading to innovations that would transform the efficiency and effectiveness of psychological operations. Intelligence gathering played a crucial role in these early psychological warfare efforts. Allied forces conducted extensive interviews with German prisoners of war, analyzing their responses to various propaganda themes and messaging approaches. These interrogations revealed important insights about German military morale, the effectiveness of Nazi propaganda, and the potential psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited through strategic messaging. The data collected during these sessions informed the development of increasingly sophisticated leaflet campaigns. The evolution from simple propaganda distribution to systematic psychological warfare required extensive research into human behavior and mass communication principles. Military psychologists, working alongside communication specialists and cultural experts, developed comprehensive frameworks for understanding how printed materials could influence decision-making processes among enemy forces. This interdisciplinary approach represented a revolutionary development in military science, establishing psychological operations as a legitimate and essential component of modern warfare. By late 1940, the Allied leaflet campaign had distributed hundreds of millions of pieces of printed material across German-occupied territories. The operational scope expanded beyond simple surrender appeals to include strategic deception, morale disruption, and civilian influence operations. These early experiences provided valuable lessons that would inform the massive psychological warfare campaigns of the later war years, establishing the foundation for operations that would ultimately contribute to the collapse of German resistance across multiple fronts. The success of these initial operations encouraged Allied commanders to invest additional resources in psychological warfare capabilities. Specialized units received advanced training in propaganda development, cultural analysis, and enemy psychology. The integration of psychological operations into broader military planning processes marked a significant evolution in strategic thinking, recognizing that victory required influencing hearts and minds, as well as defeating armed forces on traditional battlefields. The development of effective psychological warfare required more than intuitive understanding of human behavior. It demanded scientific rigor in analyzing how printed materials could influence decision-making processes among enemy forces. Allied researchers, working under intense wartime pressure, developed comprehensive methodologies for measuring psychological impact and optimizing message effectiveness. Their work established psychological operations as a legitimate military science, complete with measurable outcomes and reproducible results. Military psychologists attached to P.W.D. Schaef conducted extensive analysis of German cultural psychology, seeking to identify specific psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited through strategic messaging. Their research revealed that German soldiers responded particularly well to official-looking documents that appeared to carry governmental authority. This insight led to the development of increasingly sophisticated leaflet designs that mimicked official German documentation, complete with authoritative seals, signatures, and formal language that appealed to German cultural preferences for bureaucratic legitimacy. The scientific approach to leaflet design involved careful attention to visual presentation, textual content, and distribution timing. Researchers discovered that certain color combinations, typography choices, and layout designs produce measurably different response rates among target audiences. These findings led to the establishment of standardized design protocols that maximize psychological impact while maintaining operational efficiency. The attention to visual detail reflected a sophisticated understanding of how aesthetic elements could influence subconscious decision-making processes. Content analysis became a critical component of psychological warfare operations. Allied analysts studied captured German documents, monitored enemy radio broadcasts, and analyzed prisoner interrogation reports to identify specific themes and messaging approaches that resonated with German audiences. This research revealed that appeals to family welfare, personal survival, and post-war reconstruction proved more effective than ideological arguments or political messaging. The emphasis on practical concerns rather than abstract principles reflected a nuanced understanding of individual motivation under extreme stress. Timing considerations played an equally important role in leaflet effectiveness. Psychological warfare specialists discovered that distribution timing relative to military operations, weather conditions, and enemy supply situations significantly influenced response rates. Leaflets dropped immediately before major Allied offensives proved less effective than those distributed during periods of relative calm, when enemy forces had time to contemplate their contents without immediate operational pressures. This finding led to the development of sophisticated scheduling systems that coordinated psychological operations with broader military planning. The measurement of psychological warfare effectiveness required innovative research methodologies adapted to wartime conditions. Allied forces conducted systematic interviews with German prisoners, analyzing their responses to specific leaflet messages and distribution methods. These interviews provided quantitative data about exposure rates, message comprehension, and behavioral influence that informed ongoing operational planning. The systematic approach to effectiveness measurement represented a significant advance in military research methodology. Language considerations proved critically important in developing effective psychological warfare materials. Native German speakers, many of them refugees from Nazi persecution, worked alongside military specialists to craft messages that utilized appropriate dialects, cultural references, and linguistic subtleties that enhanced credibility and impact. The attention to linguistic authenticity reflected recognition that psychological operations required cultural sensitivity as well as strategic thinking. Distribution methods evolved significantly as researchers gained experience with large-scale psychological operations. Early leaflet drops relied on bomber aircraft flying dangerous missions over heavily defended territories, limiting both the volume and precision of material distribution. The development of specialized artillery shells designed to scatter leaflets over smaller, more precisely targeted areas provided tactical commanders with flexible options for supporting specific military operations with coordinated psychological warfare. The integration of psychological warfare with intelligence operations created synergistic effects that enhanced both activities. Information gathered through prisoner interrogations informed leaflet development, while leaflet effectiveness data provided intelligence officers with insights about enemy morale and organizational cohesion. This collaborative approach established psychological operations as an integral component of military intelligence gathering rather than a separate, independent activity. Research into enemy countermeasures became increasingly important as German forces developed their own responses to Allied psychological warfare operations. German commanders implemented disciplinary measures designed to discourage their troops from reading Allied leaflets, including severe penalties for possession of enemy propaganda materials. However, these countermeasures often proved counterproductive, as the harsh responses to leaflet possession actually increased curiosity about their contents and reinforced the effectiveness of Allied messaging about German military desperation. The scientific approach to psychological warfare extended beyond immediate military applications to broader strategic considerations about post-war reconstruction and political stability. Allied planners recognized that psychological operations could influence civilian attitudes toward occupation forces and democratic reconstruction efforts. This long-term perspective informed the development of leaflet campaigns that addressed not only immediate military objectives, but also broader political goals for post-war Europe. The evolution of Allied psychological warfare reached a revolutionary milestone with the development of the Passierschein, a safe conduct pass that would become recognized as the most effective single leaflet produced during the entire Second World War. This remarkable document represented the culmination of extensive research into German cultural psychology and demonstrated how sophisticated understanding of enemy mentality could be transformed into tangible military advantage. The concept behind the Passierschein emerged from careful analysis of German cultural characteristics, particularly the documented German preference for official, formally presented documentation. Allied psychological warfare specialists recognized that German soldiers and officers maintained deep respect for bureaucratic authority, even under extreme combat conditions. This cultural trait provided an opportunity to create a surrender document that would appeal to ingrained German expectations about official procedures and governmental legitimacy. The design process for the Passierschein involved collaboration between British and American psychological warfare experts, marking the first time the two Allied nations worked together to produce a standardized surrender document. The final version incorporated the official seals of both Great Britain and the United States, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force insignia, and the personal signature of Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower. Every design element was carefully chosen to convey maximum official authority and governmental legitimacy. The document's physical presentation rivaled that of formal governmental certificates or financial instruments. High-quality printing techniques, sophisticated engraving work, and premium paper stock created a leaflet that possessed the aesthetic qualities of important official documentation. The visual presentation was so convincing that it resembled what one observer described as a soap premium coupon with banknote-type engraving that reinforced its apparent authenticity and importance. Legal considerations played a crucial role in the Passierschein's development and effectiveness. The document incorporated specific provisions from the Geneva Convention regarding prisoner treatment, providing German soldiers with authoritative assurance that surrender would result in humane treatment according to international law. This legal foundation addressed one of the primary concerns that prevented German forces from surrendering: fear of harsh treatment at Allied hands. The inclusion of international legal protections transformed the leaflet from simple propaganda into a quasi-legal document with recognized international standing. The text of the Passierschein was crafted with exceptional attention to formal language and bureaucratic terminology that would appeal to German cultural sensibilities. Rather than using persuasive or emotional appeals, the document employed the measured, official tone associated with governmental proclamations and legal instruments. This approach reflected sophisticated understanding that German audiences would respond more positively to formal authority than to emotional manipulation or ideological arguments. Distribution strategies for the Passierschein required careful coordination with ongoing military operations. Rather than mass distributing the documents indiscriminately, Allied forces adopted a systematic approach that mixed safe conduct passes with other leaflet materials in specific proportions. Initially, Passierscheins comprised 10% of all leaflet distributions, but this proportion increased to 15% as field commanders recognized their exceptional effectiveness. In tactical situations that appeared particularly favorable for encouraging surrender, entire bomb loads consisted exclusively of safe conduct passes. The effectiveness of the Passierschein became apparent almost immediately after its introduction to combat theaters. Military commanders reported dramatic increases in German surrender rates in areas where the documents had been distributed. More importantly, prisoner interrogations revealed that surrendering German soldiers frequently carried the safe conduct passes, indicating that they had read, retained, and acted upon the documents. This behavioral evidence provided concrete proof that the psychological warfare investment was producing measurable military results. Security considerations surrounding the Passierschein reflected its recognized importance to Allied military operations. In 1944, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force issued a directive specifically forbidding the reproduction of safe conduct pass elements on other leaflet materials. This unprecedented security measure was designed to protect the authenticity and credibility of the document by preventing its dilution through association with other propaganda materials. The directive demonstrated institutional recognition that the Passierschein had achieved a level of effectiveness that required special protection. Production volumes for the Passeerschein reached extraordinary levels as Allied commanders recognized its strategic value. Manufacturing facilities produced millions of copies of the document in various formats, with different code numbers and slight variations designed for specific operational circumstances. The massive production effort required coordination between multiple printing facilities, specialized paper suppliers, and secure distribution networks that could deliver the documents to forward combat units. The psychological impact of the Passeerschein extended beyond individual surrender decisions to influence broader German military morale and organizational cohesion. German commanders found themselves dealing with troops who had been exposed to official-looking documents that provided authoritative guidance about surrender procedures and prisoner treatment. The presence of these documents in combat areas created ongoing psychological pressure that affected unit effectiveness, even among soldiers who had not personally decided to surrender. Intelligence analysis of the Passeerschein's effectiveness revealed important insights about the relationship between psychological warfare and traditional military operations. The most successful applications of safe conduct passes occurred in tactical situations where German forces were already under significant military pressure but retained sufficient organizational cohesion to make conscious decisions about surrender. This finding informed subsequent psychological warfare planning, emphasizing the importance of coordinating propaganda distribution with conventional military operations. The international recognition of the Passeerschein's effectiveness influenced post-war military doctrine development. Military colleges and strategic planning institutes studied the document's design, distribution, and impact as a model for future psychological operations. The lessons learned from this successful program informed Cold War psychological warfare strategies and established principles that continue to influence contemporary military information operations. The transformation of psychological warfare from an experimental concept to a fully integrated military capability required revolutionary advances in delivery technology and operational coordination. The development of specialized artillery shells designed to distribute leaflets represented a quantum leap in tactical psychological operations, providing field commanders with precise, flexible tools for supporting combat operations with coordinated information campaigns. Major James Monroe, a member of the Psychological Warfare Division, developed the innovation that would transform leaflet distribution efficiency and effectiveness. The Monroe leaflet bomb consisted of a laminated paper cylinder capable of holding approximately 80,000 individual leaflets. The device incorporated an automatic opening mechanism that activated at 1,000 feet above ground, ensuring optimal distribution patterns while protecting the contents during high-altitude flight. This technological breakthrough solved fundamental problems that had limited the effectiveness of early psychological warfare operations. Artillery-delivered leaflet systems provided tactical commanders with unprecedented flexibility in coordinating psychological operations with conventional military activities. Rather than relying on bomber aircraft that required extensive planning and exposed crews to enemy fire, forward commanders could deploy leaflet artillery shells as part of routine fire support missions. This integration allowed psychological warfare to become a standard component of tactical operations, rather than a specialized, separate activity requiring independent coordination. The precision targeting capabilities of artillery-delivered leaflets enabled psychological operations at the company and battalion level, dramatically expanding the scope and frequency of psychological warfare activities. Small unit commanders could target specific enemy positions with customized messages designed to exploit immediate tactical situations. This capability transformed psychological warfare from a strategic tool primarily used at the theater level into a tactical resource available to frontline commanders. The development of leaflet artillery required extensive cooperation between ordnance specialists, psychological warfare experts, and tactical commanders. Traditional artillery shells needed modification to accommodate paper payloads while maintaining ballistic accuracy and reliability. The engineering challenges involved in creating shells that could deliver printed materials intact over varying distances and under different weather conditions required innovative solutions that pushed the boundaries of conventional military technology. Operational procedures for leaflet artillery became increasingly sophisticated as commanders gained experience with the new capability. Fire direction centers developed specialized procedures for calculating optimal delivery patterns, adjusting for wind conditions, and coordinating psychological operations with conventional fire support missions. These procedures required additional training for artillery personnel and the development of new communication protocols between psychological warfare units and fire support elements. The tactical effectiveness of artillery-delivered leaflets became apparent through systematic analysis of prisoner interrogations and battlefield observations. German prisoners consistently reported exposure to leaflet materials in areas where artillery delivery had been employed, indicating successful distribution and target engagement. More importantly, tactical commanders reported measurable changes in enemy behavior patterns in areas subjected to coordinated conventional and psychological warfare operations. Content customization became a critical advantage of artillery-delivered psychological operations. Unlike mass-distributed materials designed for broad audiences, artillery-delivered leaflets could be tailored to specific tactical situations and immediate operational circumstances. This customization capability allowed psychological warfare specialists to address particular enemy units, exploit specific tactical developments, and respond to real-time intelligence about enemy morale and organizational conditions. The integration of leaflet artillery with intelligence operations created synergistic effects that enhanced both activities. Forward observers and reconnaissance elements could provide real-time assessment of leaflet distribution effectiveness, while psychological warfare specialists could adjust messaging and targeting based on immediate battlefield feedback. This close coordination between information gathering and information dissemination represented a significant advance in military operational integration. Logistical considerations for artillery-delivered psychological operations required extensive planning and resource allocation. Ammunition supply chains needed modification to accommodate leaflet shells alongside conventional ordnance, while printing facilities required rapid production capabilities to support tactical demands for customized materials. The logistical complexity of supporting widespread leaflet artillery operations demonstrated the extent to which psychological warfare had become integrated into conventional military planning. Counter-battery threats posed unique challenges for leaflet artillery operations. German forces quickly recognized that Allied leaflet distribution often preceded conventional attacks, making artillery positions engaged in psychological operations priority targets for enemy counterfire. This tactical reality required careful coordination between leaflet delivery and conventional fire missions to avoid revealing artillery positions through distinctive firing patterns associated with psychological operations. The psychological impact of artillery-delivered leaflets extended beyond their content to include the delivery method itself. German soldiers who witnessed leaflet artillery shells arriving at their positions experienced the psychological effect of realizing that Allied forces possessed sufficient resources and tactical flexibility to dedicate artillery assets to information delivery. This demonstration of overwhelming resource availability reinforced the substantive messages contained in the leaflets themselves. Training requirements for leaflet artillery operations necessitated the development of specialized educational programs for artillery personnel psychological warfare specialists, and tactical commanders. These programs address technical aspects of leaflet shell employment, tactical integration procedures, and effectiveness assessment methods. The establishment of formal training programs reflected institutional recognition that artillery-delivered psychological operations required professional competence comparable to other military specialties. The success of artillery-delivered leaflet operations influenced broader military doctrine development regarding the integration of information operations with conventional military activities. The demonstrated effectiveness of coordinated conventional and psychological warfare operations informed strategic planning for subsequent conflicts and established principles for employing information as a military capability equivalent to firepower and maneuver. By 1944, the cumulative psychological pressure of sustained leaflet operations began producing measurable effects on German military effectiveness and civilian morale that extended far beyond individual surrender decisions. The massive scale of Allied psychological warfare, approaching 3 billion distributed leaflets, created an information environment that fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of occupied Europe and demonstrated the strategic potential of coordinated information operations. Statistical analysis of prisoner interrogations revealed the remarkable penetration achieved by Allied leaflet campaigns among German military personnel. Reports indicated that over 80% of German prisoners captured on the Brest Peninsula possessed leaflets at the time of their capture, demonstrating not only successful distribution, but active retention and consideration of the materials by enemy forces. This high retention rate indicated that the psychological warfare investment was achieving its fundamental objective of influencing enemy decision-making processes. The effectiveness of psychological warfare operations varied significantly based on tactical circumstances and enemy unit characteristics. German forces under immediate combat pressure showed different response patterns than those in relatively stable defensive positions. Units that had experienced recent defeats or supply shortages demonstrated higher susceptibility to leaflet influence, while elite formations and politically indoctrinated units showed greater resistance to psychological warfare appeals. These variations provided important insights about the optimal employment of psychological operations in different tactical contexts. Leadership responses to psychological warfare created additional pressure within German military organizations. German commanders found themselves implementing increasingly harsh disciplinary measures to discourage their troops from reading Allied leaflets, including severe penalties for mere possession of enemy propaganda materials. However, these countermeasures often proved counterproductive, as the extreme reactions to leaflet possession actually increased curiosity about their contents and reinforced Allied messaging about German military desperation. The psychological impact of leaflet operations extended beyond immediate military targets to influence German civilian populations in occupied territories. Leaflets directed at civilian audiences addressed practical concerns about survival during military operations, post-war reconstruction opportunities, and protection of family members during the transition to Allied control. These civilian-focused operations created additional pressure on German military forces by influencing the broader social environment in which they operated. German counter-propaganda efforts revealed the extent to which Allied psychological warfare had achieved strategic significance. Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels publicly acknowledged the sophistication of Allied leaflet operations, describing them as very clever leaflets that posed serious challenges to German morale maintenance efforts. This official recognition from the enemy propaganda apparatus provided authoritative confirmation of the psychological warfare campaign's effectiveness. The coordination of psychological operations with major military campaigns reached unprecedented levels of sophistication during the final year of the European War. The D-Day invasion incorporated massive leaflet distribution designed to support landing operations by encouraging German defenders to surrender rather than resist. These coordinated operations demonstrated how psychological warfare could serve as a force multiplier for conventional military activities. Intelligence analysis of captured German documents revealed internal discussions about the impact of Allied leaflet operations on unit effectiveness and morale. German military reports documented declining combat performance in units that had been subjected to sustained psychological warfare, indicating that the effects extended beyond individual surrender decisions to influence broader organizational effectiveness. This documentation provided objective evidence of strategic-level impact from psychological operations. The development of specialized leaflet materials for specific tactical situations demonstrated the maturation of psychological warfare as a military science. Rather than relying on generic surrender appeals, psychological warfare specialists created customized materials that addressed particular enemy units, exploited specific tactical developments, and responded to real-time intelligence about enemy psychological vulnerabilities. This level of sophistication indicated that psychological operations had achieved professional competence comparable to other military specialties. The measurement of psychological warfare effectiveness required innovative research methodologies that could provide quantitative assessment of psychological impact. Allied forces developed systematic approaches to analyzing prisoner responses, measuring behavioral changes in enemy units, and correlating psychological operations with conventional military outcomes. These research efforts established psychological operations as a measurable military capability with demonstrable return on investment. Regional variations in leaflet effectiveness revealed important insights about cultural and situational factors that influence psychological operations. German forces defending their homeland showed different response patterns than those occupying foreign territories, while veteran units demonstrated different psychological characteristics than newly formed organizations. These variations informed tactical employment decisions and contributed to the development of more sophisticated psychological warfare strategies. The strategic implications of successful psychological warfare extended beyond immediate military objectives to influence broader Allied planning for post-war reconstruction. The demonstrated ability to influence German civilian attitudes through printed materials informed occupation planning and democratic reconstruction efforts. This long-term perspective reflected recognition that psychological operations could serve political as well as military objectives. The culmination of 3 years of intensive psychological warfare operations created unprecedented challenges for German military leadership in maintaining unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. The sustained information pressure, combined with deteriorating military circumstances and declining resource availability, produced psychological conditions that fundamentally altered the character of German resistance. This transformation demonstrated the strategic potential of psychological operations as a decisive military capability. The influence of Allied psychological warfare extended far beyond immediate battlefield applications to encompass broader strategic objectives related to civilian morale, post-war reconstruction, and the fundamental transformation of German society. As Allied forces advanced deeper into German territory, psychological operations evolved to address complex challenges associated with occupation, denazification, and the establishment of democratic governance in defeated territories. Civilian-targeted leaflet operations represented a significant expansion of psychological warfare objectives beyond traditional military applications. These campaigns addressed practical concerns about survival during military operations, cooperation with occupation forces, and participation in post-war reconstruction efforts. The sophisticated messaging reflected recognition that military victory required complementary success in influencing civilian attitudes and behaviors that would determine long-term political stability. The coordination between military psychological operations and civilian affairs planning demonstrated unprecedented integration between combat and post-combat objectives. Psychological warfare specialists worked closely with military government planners to develop messaging strategies that would facilitate the transition from active hostilities to occupation administration. This collaboration reflected evolving military doctrine that recognized information operations as essential components of comprehensive strategic planning. Intelligence analysis of civilian responses to psychological warfare revealed important insights about German society's psychological condition and political attitudes. Extensive interviews with German civilians in occupied territories provided data about the effectiveness of Nazi propaganda, the extent of popular support for continued resistance, and the potential for democratic reconstruction. This intelligence informed broader strategic planning and contributed to the development of occupation policies. The challenge of addressing war crimes and Nazi atrocities through psychological operations required exceptional sensitivity and strategic sophistication. Allied leaflets needed to inform German civilians about the extent of Nazi crimes without creating such psychological shock that effective post-war cooperation became impossible. The delicate balance between truth-telling and practical governance considerations reflected the complex relationship between psychological warfare and political objectives. Educational components of psychological warfare operations addressed long-term objectives related to democratic reconstruction and political re-education. Leaflets designed for civilian audiences included information about democratic principles, individual rights, and the benefits of international cooperation. These educational materials represented an expansion of psychological operations beyond immediate military objectives to encompass broader transformation goals. The integration of psychological warfare with humanitarian operations created additional opportunities for influencing civilian attitudes and behaviors. Leaflets that provided information about food distribution, medical assistance, and refugee services demonstrated Allied concern for civilian welfare and contributed to the development of cooperative relationships between occupation forces and German populations. This humanitarian dimension added credibility and effectiveness to psychological operations. Counterintelligence considerations became increasingly important as psychological warfare operations expanded into civilian-focused activities. German intelligence services attempted to exploit Allied leaflet operations by creating false materials designed to discredit legitimate psychological warfare efforts. The threat of enemy deception required sophisticated authentication measures and careful quality control procedures to maintain the credibility of Allied information operations. The measurement of civilian-focused psychological warfare effectiveness required research methodologies adapted to non-military populations and political rather than tactical objectives. Allied researchers developed survey techniques, focus group procedures, and longitudinal studies designed to assess changes in civilian attitudes and political orientations. These research efforts contributed to the development of social science methodologies that influenced post-war academic and policy research. Regional variations in civilian responses to psychological warfare reflected complex cultural, religious, and political differences within German society. Catholic populations showed different response patterns than Protestant communities, while urban and rural audiences demonstrated distinct characteristics that required customized messaging approaches. These variations informed the development of targeted psychological operations that addressed specific demographic segments. The coordination of psychological operations with international relief organizations created additional opportunities for reinforcing Allied messaging about post-war reconstruction and democratic governance. Collaboration with humanitarian agencies provided credible channels for distributing information about Allied intentions and occupation policies while demonstrating practical commitment to civilian welfare. Economic themes in civilian-focused psychological warfare addressed practical concerns about post-war reconstruction, employment opportunities, and international trade relationships. Leaflets that discussed Marshall Plan concepts, currency reform, and economic cooperation with allied nations provided concrete incentives for civilian cooperation and democratic participation. These economic messages complemented political themes and contributed to comprehensive transformation strategies. The psychological impact of occupation-related leaflet operations extended beyond immediate practical considerations to influence broader cultural attitudes about international relations and democratic governance. Long-term exposure to Allied messaging about individual rights, political participation, and international cooperation contributed to fundamental changes in German political culture that facilitated successful democratic reconstruction. The development of psychological warfare capabilities for post-conflict operations established precedents that influenced subsequent military planning for occupation and reconstruction activities. The demonstrated effectiveness of information operations in facilitating political transformation informed strategic planning for later conflicts and contributed to the development of comprehensive approaches to post-conflict stability operations. The success of civilian-focused psychological warfare operations provided important validation for theoretical concepts about the relationship between information, political attitudes, and social transformation. The measurable changes in German civilian behavior and political orientation demonstrated that systematic information campaigns could contribute to fundamental political change under appropriate circumstances. The conclusion of hostilities in Europe marked not the end, but the transformation of Allied psychological warfare operations. As the massive infrastructure and accumulated expertise developed during wartime found new applications in post-war reconstruction, occupation administration, and the emerging challenges of Cold War competition. The 3 billion leaflets distributed during the European campaign had demonstrated conclusively that information could serve as a decisive military capability, fundamentally altering strategic thinking about the role of communication in national security. Post-war analysis of psychological warfare effectiveness provided comprehensive validation for the enormous investment in information operations during the conflict. Systematic surveys of German prisoners revealed that approximately 50 to 60% of enemy forces had been psychologically influenced by Allied leaflet operations, with many prisoners acknowledging that propaganda had contributed to their decision to surrender or cease effective resistance. These statistics provided quantitative confirmation that psychological operations had achieved strategic-level impact on enemy military effectiveness. The institutional legacy of wartime psychological operations influenced the development of permanent military capabilities for information warfare and strategic communication. The expertise accumulated by psychological warfare specialists, the technological innovations in information distribution, and the research methodologies developed for measuring psychological impact created a foundation for continued military investment in information operations as a core capability rather than a temporary wartime expedient. Educational institutions and military colleges incorporated lessons learned from psychological warfare operations into their curricula, establishing information operations as a legitimate field of military study, comparable to traditional subjects like tactics, strategy, and logistics. The academic treatment of psychological warfare reflected institutional recognition that future conflicts would require systematic approaches to influencing adversary decision-making processes. The technological innovations developed for leaflet distribution found civilian applications in advertising, political communication, and mass media distribution. The Monroe leaflet bomb and similar devices influenced the development of civilian technologies for mass communication, while the research into optimal message design and audience targeting contributed to advances in marketing and public relations methodologies. Intelligence agencies recognized the strategic value of psychological operations capabilities for peacetime competition and crisis management. The demonstrated ability to influence foreign populations through systematic information campaigns provided tools for addressing international challenges that fell short of armed conflict but required active measures to protect national interests. This recognition contributed to the establishment of permanent capabilities for international information operations. The research methodologies developed for assessing psychological warfare effectiveness influenced post-war social science research in psychology, sociology, and political science. The systematic approaches to measuring attitude change, behavioral influence, and mass communication effectiveness contributed to academic understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Many of the research techniques pioneered during wartime psychological operations became standard methodologies in civilian social science research. International law and diplomatic practice incorporated lessons learned from psychological warfare operations, establishing precedents and principles for the use of information in international relations. The legal frameworks developed for psychological operations, particularly regarding the treatment of surrendering personnel and the protection of civilian populations, influenced the development of international humanitarian law and conflict resolution procedures. The strategic implications of successful psychological warfare extended beyond military applications to influence broader national security thinking about the role of information in international competition. The demonstrated effectiveness of systematic information campaigns informed the development of public diplomacy programs, international broadcasting services, and cultural exchange initiatives designed to advance national interests through non-military means. Veterans of psychological warfare operations carried their expertise into civilian careers in journalism, advertising, public relations, and academic research, disseminating knowledge and techniques throughout American society. This dispersion of specialized knowledge contributed to advances in mass communication, marketing research, and political campaigning that influenced the development of modern media industries and democratic political processes. The Cold War competition with the Soviet Union provided new applications for psychological warfare capabilities and validated the strategic importance of information operations in peacetime competition. The expertise and institutional capabilities developed during World War II provided the foundation for extensive information operations during the Cold War, demonstrating the continuing relevance of psychological warfare capabilities. Technological developments in communication and media distribution built upon innovations pioneered during wartime psychological operations. The transition from printed materials to radio, television, and eventually digital media represented evolutionary advances in delivery mechanisms rather than fundamental changes in the strategic concepts established during World War II psychological warfare campaigns. The success of Allied psychological operations influenced enemy nations and potential adversaries, who developed their own capabilities for information warfare based on careful study of Allied techniques and achievements. The proliferation of psychological warfare capabilities among various nations reflected recognition that information operations had become an essential component of modern military and political competition. Academic research into the effectiveness of psychological operations continued throughout the post-war period, producing extensive literature that analyzed the strategic, tactical, and technological aspects of information warfare. This research contributed to theoretical understanding of mass communication, social psychology, and political behavior while providing practical guidance for future information operations. The integration of psychological warfare lessons into broader military doctrine established information operations as a permanent component of military planning and training. Contemporary military forces incorporate information operations into all levels of planning and execution, reflecting institutional recognition that modern conflicts require comprehensive approaches that address psychological as well as physical dimensions of warfare. The transformation of psychological warfare from an experimental wartime expedient to a recognized military capability represents one of the most significant innovations in military science during the 20th century. The 3 billion leaflets dropped over Europe between 1939 and 1945 established principles and precedents that continue to influence military strategy, international relations, and mass communication in the contemporary era. The story of American leaflet operations during World War II reveals how innovation, scientific rigor, and cultural understanding combined to create military capabilities that transcended traditional concepts of warfare. The 3 billion paper bullets dropped over Europe between 1939 and 1945 demonstrated that information could serve as a decisive weapon, capable of achieving strategic objectives without conventional destruction. The men and women who developed, produced, and distributed these psychological warfare materials pioneered techniques that continue to influence military strategy, international relations, and mass communication. Their work established that victory in modern conflicts requires comprehensive approaches that address hearts and minds, as well as traditional military objectives. The legacy of these operations extends far beyond their immediate military applications. The research methodologies, technological innovations, and strategic concepts developed during wartime psychological operations contributed to advances in social science, mass communication, and democratic governance that continue to benefit society today. As we face contemporary challenges in an increasingly connected world, the lessons learned from World War II psychological operations remain relevant and instructive. The demonstration that systematic, scientifically based information campaigns can influence human behavior and political outcomes provides valuable insights for addressing modern conflicts and international challenges. The remarkable success of these paper bullets reminds us that the most powerful weapons are often those that change minds rather than destroy targets, that victory can be achieved through persuasion as well as force, and that the ultimate battlefield in human conflict is the realm of ideas and understanding.